And another good day to you, Minot sports fans, and welcome to another episode of the Minot Sports Podcast, bringing you all the latest in Minot sports news, content, stats, scores, whatever else have you. Welcome in once again. This is episode 25 of the second season, and this will be our last show of season 2 before moving on to the summer series. I'd like to welcome you guys in. I'm your host, Cole Clementich, broadcasting and professional communications major here at Minot State University, heading into my junior year at the college here in town. As always, we are part of the KMSU TV and Radio series. We thank KMSU for allowing us to use the studios to record, get behind the mic, and talk anything and everything involving Minot sports. We are also brought to you by Peyton Bartsch and Joshua Strong Photography. Give those two guys a follow on social media. Widely talented photographers here in the area. Follow Josh at _Joshua W. Strong on both Twitter and Instagram. Then for Peyton Bartsch, at Bartsch Photos on Twitter and at Peyton Bartsch Photography on Instagram. Also, checked out KMSU TV and Radio. They are the MSU Broadcasting Department. That is the brand name for the TV and radio stations here inside the department. I know it says in the latest commercial that I was able to hook up with Trey and work on together. It says it's the brand name for the department. It's more the brand name for the radio and TV stations, but still making good progress there. Let me know what you guys think of that, the new KMSU ad being implemented, and I guess any sort of commercial will apply there. So let me know what you guys think, if at all anything you guys want to include any sort of insight or not. I'm cool with either or. But as I was saying, go check out KMSU on social media at KMSU TV Radio on Instagram, at KMSU TV on YouTube, and at KMSU19 on both Facebook and Twitter. Find the podcast also on social media, at Minot Sports Podcast on Instagram, at the Minot Sports Podcast on Facebook, and at Minot Podcast on Twitter. If you want to follow me on some of my personal pages, I am also on there. Just search up my name, Cole Clementich. You might find me, you may not, although I definitely think you guys will have no problem in case you are interested in that. But I do not tend to post much on my personals. It's more on the podcast social media pages. And I guess really nothing wrong with that. But anyways, guys, welcome to episode 25. Like I said, this will be our final episode of season 2, and then we shall move on to the 2021 summer series, unless if I decide to kind of mix them up or go a different direction. This is how it will go. But I want to thank you guys for tuning in all school year long. Definitely hoping to continue to grow this thing and reach out to a wider audience. But with you guys now, it's absolutely amazing. The feedback I've gotten and the support you guys have given is just amazing. I appreciate all of you listening in. And so last time on episode 24, I promised you guys that we would recap Class B winter athletics. Well, the semester kind of got away from me. Lost a lot of time to do much of anything as far as getting to work in the studio. Been able to provide you guys the sports coverage of all the games, or at least most of the games happening each and every night. But besides that, the semester, I guess you can say somewhat got away from me. I don't really want to make excuses. I'm not quite sure how to, present it in a way that makes the most sense. But like I said, we recapped Class B winter athletics, and having gone through a whole semester, we are now into the summer. It is actually June 23rd at the time I'm recording this. So if you want to make an important note of that, June 23rd, well into the summer. We have gone through the entire spring sports season for the high schools involving Minot High, Bishop Ryan, and R.E. Deemers. We also have some Minotauros hockey to talk about as they just concluded their season. We have some summer teams to talk about as well. The Souris Valley Saberdogs getting started the Minot Storm fast pitch team getting started as well. The Legion baseball season. Super stoked, super excited to get talking about them. Even though the Vistas have only played one home game so far, that just means they'll have a heavy home schedule for the second half of the season, and can't really go wrong with that. So, plus we have lots more to talk about, as well as coaching hires and such. But the main focus at hand here, spring athletics for the high schools, and let me tell you, it was a wild one, and the way it ended to cap off the high school sports season is a strong finish. And so let's go through each of them just kind of one by one really quickly. We'll start off with RE Deemers golf, and I guess we'll throw in Bishop Ryan golf in there as well. I don't think not much to talk about. They competed, especially Zach Hendrickson of RE Deemers making an appearance in the state tournament. I couldn't remember if the team scores were good enough to make it to state, but Zach Hendrickson from RE Deemers making his presence felt there. And honestly, it's got to feel good for the athletes to be back on the course after it was canceled all last year. Is definitely a step in the right direction to get their sanity and just peace back in order. And make no mistake, we had some highlights from golf, and especially moving on to the Class A level with Minot High. Them as a team qualified for the state tournament, taking fourth place. But the big one, Gavin Argent, the individual state champion. Yes, Gavin Argent of Minot High Boys Golf is the state champion, the individual medalist, and you can clearly see why Gavin was highly touted by the University of Mary, which is where he is going for his college golf career to get started in a golf career at the next level in college. And he had some moments where, yeah, he was on top, but he wasn't the clear-cut winner in some, but he made it count in the most important one, and that was the state tournament. And he was phenomenal in other ones too, taking first or becoming a medalist in some of the other matches. But the big one, definitely the state tournament. Congrats to Gavin. Taking it actually in an extra playoff hole. They were tied through regulation. Gavin Argent over Zach Hinchberger of Grand Forks Red River. So they went the distance. Gavin edging out for the medal. And congrats, Gavin. And also WDA and State Senior Athlete of the Year. That is, in fact, Gavin Argent. And the Minot High Magicians also claiming the WDA championship before the state tournament. So them as a team didn't do too bad as well. So phenomenal work by Minot High and Gavin Argent. Also congrats on the season by RE Deemers and Bishop Ryan, especially for the Knights, to get Zach Hendrickson in there competing, taking 8th at state. So wonderful job there, Zach. We also want to mention some more state champions. We move our way over to girls tennis. So the team may have come up short, losing to Mandan 4-1 in the title game and in the WDA championship game as well, or matchup, I should say. But we had some doubles champions to report on. Eden Olson from RE Deemers and Sophia Eggy from Minot High combining forces to take the 2021 girls tennis doubles state championship. So wonderful job, ladies. They also take the WDA title as well in that department. Phenomenal work there by those two ladies. And was there ever a doubt that Majets tennis was going to be on a downhill slope? And even after a year off, they're still up there. They still proved that they can compete. They proved their worth of being up there with all the big teams, the big name clubs up there on the mountain. Just that Mandan was too dominant, way better than the rest of the pack this year. Unfortunately, did not collect it as a team. Still, a congrats to both Olson and Eggy. And for the team as well, having not played an entire year last year, they're still that dominant force in the Western Dakota Association and the state as well, having taken down some big name schools from out east too, especially getting a 4-1 round 1 win over Grand Forks Central and 3-2 over Fargo Davies. Pretty impressive work right there. Taking it now, we'll start off first with Class A baseball. We'll get to Class B in a moment here, but Class A baseball. The Minot High Magicians at the start of the year, before preseason, or actually for the preseason rankings, they were tabbed as the favorite to win the WDA title game. And you think, well, the secret's out there, and probably fair to say that they had a target on their back, and the big question was going to be, were they going to live up to that hype? And you could say they did in some ways. They definitely did that. However, they didn't take the WDA championship game. They still got in by clinching the state qualifier game. I need to check to see who it was. It was Mandan. I had a feeling it was Mandan, but 11-1, number 3 seed defeats the number 4 seed. Obviously, as you can tell, Minot High was the 3 seed. They had beaten Bismarck St. Mary's in round 1, 3-0, but then lost to the 2nd seeded Bismarck Legacy Sabres 9-0. That was the ugly matchup for the Magicians, but rebounding much needed in the state qualifier. The WDA tournament happened in Dickinson at Astoria Field. This team had actually started off really hot. I can't quite remember the number, but they were on a winning streak to start the season, and then kind of a few slip-ups here and there, but they were still steady enough that they were top 3 in the West, and you would guess that the 4 best teams would obviously fight for that spot in the state tournament, and Minot High was one of the lucky recipients of that. And one of the key components of this team, most notably off the start, everything was working for them, pitching and batting. But if I had to pick one, the batting in the offense was probably way more noticeable than the pitching. Despite all of these great pitchers that Minot High possesses, their batting offensively was just as good, if not better. And you could tell by that state qualifier match, winning by 10 runs, that is showing up in a big-time spot in a big-time game right there. Question was going to be, would that offense hold up? Because, yeah, they had great pitching, but rest of the defense may have been suspect a little bit. There were a lot of high-scoring games that Minot High, well, I shouldn't say a lot, but there were quite a few high-scoring games that Minot High had gotten into. Not too terribly bad, but was it going to hold up against the steep competition from the West? And unfortunately, it did not. Having lost to West Fargo Cheyenne 9-0 in the first game of the state tourney, and so they would move to the consolation bracket, and they would get bounced in consolation play against the Grand Forks Red River Rough Riders. They would have a lead for most of the game, but then blew it, losing 8-7, and that is where Minot High finished in the results of Class A baseball, the Class A state bracket, and probably not a result you're looking for if you're Minot High. And there's going to be a lot of key members of the team that are graduated. Chase Burke, we should mention, WDA and Senior Athlete of the Year. I don't think, well, obviously, the teammates know him pretty well, but we should give him all the credit in the world for what this team had. And then you have Chase Burke also on the table. He just took this team to another level. And honestly, we need to give him the more credit than he deserves. So he was phenomenal. Congrats, Chase, on the accomplishments. As a team, however, a tough finish, losing in consolation play and getting bounced out of the state tournament early. There are still a lot of key players coming back next year, and I think with the tradition that the seniors have set in place, I don't think there's going to be really any major issues or holes coming up for this team, well, minus that you got Dickinson and Legacy, and still Century and Mandan right behind you, or right up there with you, or behind you. They have a culture set in place that I don't think there's going to be many holes to this team. They brought out the bats this year. It was evident. And they have some key pitchers that they can mix and match on the mound. And really, Coach Stenberg has gotten very creative with how he set his lineup. Even at times where I didn't think he would do this or do that, I would go and see he would put Chase Burke himself was a pretty darn good relief pitcher. And, well, that was mostly the role he had played on the mound, but he's more known for his batting average and offensive capabilities, also playing a huge part in the outfield as well, playing center field, having that depth perception, getting the ball when it's up midair, and he did a great job leading this team, as well as the many great pitchers and fantastic role players too. I mean, you got to give Trent Greek credit. I mean, all or nothing mentality when he's at the plate, but when he gets all in, he can crank that thing out of here all in a hurry. And he was phenomenal at that. Getting a few, I know one home run for sure, but I think he had more than that. I think he had a few. So as a team, probably not what they had hoped for, but I think entering next year, I don't think there are going to be too many holes for this team. I think they got mostly everything taken care of. So we'll see what next year looks like for them. And then for Class B, Bishop Bryan, they were interesting. Like they didn't wow you for every game. At times, maybe you could say they were the underdog, just maybe. But this was a team that just got the job done. Like they closed out games when they needed to. Just that when they needed a big game, they showed up. It's almost like the mentality, they didn't care if they were the underdogs or they were, actually the 2 seed heading into the region tournament, that's what they got. They were the 2nd seed, and they just went out there and they played baseball. Going back to the region championship game, they were losing to the Velva Aggies, or actually I should say the Velva Drake Animus Aggies, because there's that spring season where some schools you don't see mix a sport with players together. That's just how it got to be with Velva and Drake Animus, but the Velva and Drake Animus Aggies, they were leading in the region championship game against Bishop Bryan, and it was looking like that Velva was gonna take it. They were solidifying themselves as the region champions. They were bound. They were ready. But Bishop Bryan, they didn't let that bother them. They came back and they won it. They won it huge. I believe it was an 8-6 final score in that one. And when you talk about Bishop Bryan baseball, their squad, they just persevered. They didn't care what the seeds were. Obviously, I'm kind of spitballing some of the same stuff I've been saying earlier, but they didn't care where they were at in the standings. Like they just went out there and they played. No matter the situation, they did not let that get to them. And probably one of the mentally strong teams, one of the few mentally strong teams this high school sports season, definitely Bishop Bryan Lions baseball. Kind of had a little more of a conservative approach. I don't think they ever got into too much trouble with base running. But again, it's that great mix of players that not only can bat, but can also pitch pretty darn well too. And when you have that flexibility as a baseball coach here in Minot, oh boy, that's gotta get you smiling. And that's what Ben Magnuson had. They had key runs, timely runs, games they needed to win, they won. Games they probably had no business in winning. You could argue the region championship game, the region 6 championship game, they still clawed their way back. But overall, this team just found a way to win every time. Maybe not so much a conservative approach, maybe just more of a conservative approach base running. I know they have guys that just want to go, but I didn't see them get into too much trouble in base running that costed them too much. They hardly made any mistakes. I mean, obviously, those are going to happen no matter what level of baseball you go to, mistakes will happen. I just did not see, any mistake from this Bishop Bryan team that really warranted them to lose that game, or any mistakes that really costed them. I didn't see much of that. They really played it safely, and they did it well. And when you mix that with that mental toughness, man, they were a hard team to beat. It's like you give them an inch and they will go a mile with it. They had more than enough players that were capable of hitting the ball in deep, and they had definitely more than enough guys that were capable of going 5-6 innings each game. I think that happened more often than not. So credit to Bishop Bryan. Unfortunately, did not bring home a state championship. When you go up against a phenomenal program like Thompson, holding them to 4 runs. I know you didn't get the win against them, but holding them to 4 runs and an outstanding sports program like Thompson High School, that's still pretty impressive what they did. You cannot deny that they gave all that they had. And I think that's just the mentality that especially goes back to the basketball days when they played rugby, only losing by 4 points in the region semifinals. Many of those guys returned to the baseball diamond, and they kept that same mentality, and they feel they can compete with anyone. There's no denying their heart and character and grit. And the results, obviously they didn't show up as wins, but definitely nothing to be ashamed about. Giving it all you had against good programs like rugby and basketball and Thompson in baseball, not an easy thing to do. But they lost 4-2 in round 1 to Thompson, beat Beulah 2-1 in extra innings. That was a competitive one, and that was another perfect example of their mental toughness, one that they were able to pull out. And then, unfortunately, losing their final game of the season, and for the seniors, still taking 6th place, making it to the Consolation Championship, but lost to the Central Cass Squirrels. But still, some great signs from this ball club. It has to have the coaching staff and the fans, you guys, listeners, Bishop Bryan, students out there listening here, that's got to leave some sort of confidence heading into next year, because they're setting a standard, and anything short of that will be unacceptable. But this team, I think, with the success they have had in the past, they continue to, I'm not sure if overachieve is the right way to put it, but it kind of feels something like that. But they continue to win games that they need to and compete and win games that they probably have no business in. But they showed out greatly, and the results were more positive than negative. So, although not the result the team had been probably looking for, definitely a congrats to them on a great season. We stick now at the ballpark diamond, where we got softball for Minot High and Bishop Bryan. We'll begin here with the Majets. For all of the times, going back to their state title in 2018, kind of a little bit of a drop-off. Pretty sure there was one state tournament appearance in that time span between last year and the year before. Obviously, last year, all spring high school athletics and mostly everything not happening. But kind of a tough downhill trend for the Majets, having lost in a state qualifier matchup against the Bismarck High Demons. Now, say what you want about the seeding, but that was just kind of a weird result in the WDA tournament that just did not help the Majets in any way. I believe, if I remember correctly, they were the 5 seeds, so just sitting outside the top 4, and usually only 4 teams from the West can go to the state tournament. Minot High being a 5 seed, that's an even tougher hill to climb. They lost 6-1 to Jamestown in round 1. They won, actually, in 5 innings versus the Williston Coyotes, sending them home early, but then the 2-seeded Bismarck High Demons somehow found their way in a state qualifying match. Just goes to show the steep competition that play in for softball in North Dakota, and Minot High finding themselves out of the state tournament, losing again to the Demons 8-2. And that is the conclusion of their season. I think it's fair to say that this team had many opportunities to capitalize, and I think it's fair to say that that didn't go in the Majet's way for the softball team. I mean, obviously, it's easy to say, like I've been saying, in games you're supposed to win, they did that. In games where they had no business in winning, they lost. Some of the splits, I mean, it helps to get some splits against the Bismarck teams. You know, they've showed great promise in the regular season. Like, they showed that they can still be that team from 2018, at least show some shades of it. But when the time came for postseason, it just wasn't there for them. And you look back and, you know, they made it. I mean, granted, Williston was an opponent that should have been a guarantee win for them. They got it done. And I think, you know, when you say they probably should have capitalized on opportunities, you could also say that they were probably unlucky having to play the number 2 seed in a state qualifier while they were the 5th seed. I mean, obviously, let's not say that upsets don't happen, but some of it was luck. But overall, I think when the time came to perform, that it was not there for them, unfortunately. The first round, you could say, was a toss-up in which Jamestown was just the better team. Minot High having won the game they needed to in the loser out, but luck was not on their side and lost to the 2 seed in Bismarck High. So their season came to an end early, not having made it to the state tournament. They move on and regroup because this team is still very good. This team is still can be one of those big clubs at the top of every regular season and heading into the tournament. Like I said, they showed signs in the games to get to the tournament, but it just didn't continue for the Majets in tourney season. Then continuing on with Bishop Bryan, this one's kind of a weird one, but yet when the steep competition came to play in Minot, you know, Bishop Bryan, they were the ones trying to hang on and score anything all for themselves. They got into a bunch of these high-scoring games. Honestly, this spring, there were a lot of high-scoring games between all the teams, and Bishop Bryan was just another example. Even if it was one-sided, or whether it was one-sided or both teams were engaged, you know, it was bound to happen that you would see Bishop Bryan at least not score a huge bunch of runs per game. And that fell upon the pitching, but you could argue that there were not very many pitchers' duels in the Class B softball season this past spring. So a lot of what Bishop Bryan's identity was score runs and score runs fast. It was a lot of zigzagging, flip-flopping of games where Bishop Bryan was getting lucky and getting opportunities to score, stealing bases, you know, base running. Wasn't perfect, but still, you know, base running, stealing bases, stealing for home. You know, they capped on their opportunities, but, you know, the next game, it would just flip. And, you know, whoever else they would play next, things would just work out well for them, no matter who it was. So this was kind of a weird season. Granted, the state of Class B softball, you know, it was either you're going to get it one way or the other. There wasn't a whole lot of in between. And Bishop Bryan, one game, they would score plenty, be opportunistic, mindset, capable. Then the next day or the next game, it would just be kind of a role reversal. Now, obviously, it wasn't like that entirely, but that was pretty much the main theme of what was happening during this Class B baseball season. The Lions did make it past the Sub-Region 3 tournament, but then lost in the loser-out game of the West Region tournament. Starting off in round 1, well, they had gotten the Sub-Region 3 4 seed, so again, there's that tall hill you gotta climb. lost to Beulah, which was the first seed in the sub-region 4, losing to Beulah 5-2 in the quarterfinals. And then this is where that offense that I was talking about, 15-11, the Wilton Wing Miners, just like Beulah, also the Miners, Wilton Wing defeating Bishop Ryan 15-11, and that ends Bishop Ryan's season. And like I've been saying, kind of a wacky one. No, it's more a lot of offense this season. Is going to be a matter of which pitcher can rise up to the occasion and just give up the least runs, or not, it's not all on the pitchers, but the least runs defensively. So, but that concludes the Ryan softball season. And now, possibly one of the best ones we're ever going to talk about here on this episode, the Minot High Majets soccer team. Did they ever have a season for the ages? Because they are the 2021 Girls Class A Soccer State Champions, defeating the Fargo Davies Eagles 6-0. Then before that, having beaten the West Fargo Packers 4-1, shutting out a very tough Fargo Shanley Deacons team 1-0, the team that beat them in the state title game the last time there was a girls soccer season. And then the championship came and they showed up big time. Huge results from all the top line players for the Majets. And this team was just so much talent all around that you couldn't deny their place as, a threat to win the WDA and the state tournament. I haven't really talked much. Well, I used to talk about it in the past, but I didn't quite get to it in softball. They have, youth softball prep leagues for all the younger players, building that culture. I forgot to mention that earlier, but this is also what soccer has. With the Minot Soccer Association and all the players that go through it, and getting on the high school team to play, there's just so much talent all throughout the roster, and it paid off greatly in a state title for the Minot High girls, their first one in school history. So now you can add them to the list. Girls soccer, you can add to a list that has a state champion. And boy, what a phenomenal season it was for them, going undefeated, 16-0 all throughout. One absurd stat that you just really could say, man, you throw that team out there on the pitch and they're not ever losing a game ever again. When you think of these stats, let me pull it up here. 106 goals for, with 4 goals against. Again, going undefeated at 16-0. That includes their WDA championship, the games they won in the state tournament, all the games they had won in the regular season. Most absurd, and actually both these stats are really absurd when you think about it. 106 goals for and 4 goals against, going 16-0 for a state title. How does one not think that team's not winning a state title? Well, I mean, obviously, they went undefeated, which includes the state title game winning the championship. But how does one not think that a team like that doesn't win a state title? I mean, yes, you can argue that the teams out east, they're at a whole other level as to what the West is, but you can throw that argument out the door because a West team just completed the job, and we are so lucky here in the Minot community that it is our own Minot High Majet squad, that we're lucky to call them our own. And what a phenomenal season from them. Just flat out all high-octane offense, so fast, so very capable of scoring and just coming at you in waves. I mean, you go to all those girls' soccer games at home, I guarantee you that probably no more than 10 seconds has been spent on defense for Minot High. Like, they were just a wall, and they, of course, with all the talent, they just kept pushing the pace. They kept pushing anything you had against them. They just were one step further. They were one step above you. You had no answer for them, and that is exactly the case. No one had an answer. It was all and only the Majets. And so a big congratulations to them, the 2021 Class A girls soccer state champions. And hey, why not run it back? They're still going to be strong as ever next year. They're still going to have a lot of returning players. Who wouldn't think they can't? Or who says they can't repeat next year? That's how good they are. So they are very capable of doing it again. And I have no doubt about it, and I'm sure all of you guys have no doubt indeed. But obviously, we're talking about getting into it next year, and there's absolutely a strong chance that they can do it again. It is also important to note that enjoy this time right now. This is your first state championship in girls soccer history. Congrats, Minot High. A job well done. Just all throughout the entire season. It just seemed like, without a doubt, they got it done, and most deservedly so. And so there you have it for the high school spring season reflections. Also want to give a shout out to track and field as well. Good to see the kids out there competing, as always. Unfortunately, nothing much to note of on their front, but still want to give them a quick shout out because they work hard to train each and every day. We take it now to the college ranks, where this is the time now where actually let's take it back a little bit. So during the winter sports season for the Beavers, when they announced a schedule for basketball teams, for wrestling, even though it was a condensed schedule, that had to have got people thinking that, well, if this is happening, what makes them think that they can't do a full spring season, a full regularly scheduled spring season, just with a few more protocols in there? Like, what's there to stop a spring sports season from being reduced or not the way it usually is? And this was, I'd probably guess, this was the direction that we were most likely headed for. If the winter teams got somewhat of a condensed schedule, you had to assume that a regular spring season was going to happen. And that is exactly what happened. Softball, baseball for the Beavers, track and field, golf, they all got regular seasons. Nothing fancy, nothing too crazy about it, nothing condensed, nothing shortened. Obviously, if games had to cancel because of COVID restrictions or COVID-related issues, obviously that happened. That was probably going to happen. But this past winter sports season for Minot State Athletics, it was a sign that I think we can all agree that we were going to have a spring sports season, and that is exactly what happened. And thank goodness we got it back, because these teams, just so many lost feelings of hopelessness there from last year, having the seasons canceled. They feel much more motivated to be back. And hey, what a good sign that was from the winter season to have a condensed schedule lead towards an even bigger comeback with the spring sports season. But I won't bore you guys much longer. Let's get into it, starting with Minot State baseball. You know them. You know they're going to be competitive. Remember back in 2018, NSIC champs over the University of Mary. They're still setting that standard, that high standard, those high expectations. They have the players to get it done. The group is well-rounded. They're all having fun together, playing their favorite game that they also love. The expectations were high going into the season. And sure enough, the regular season just proved that point, that the Beavers, they were going to be contenders once again in that NSIC conference. They were very good at home. Literally anyone they went up against, there weren't many games where they were considered underdogs. Like, you could even say in the NSIC playoff series, the best of 3 series going up against Minnesota Crookston, you could argue they were not an underdog. A lot of these games, they were not underdogs. They played some great baseball at home especially, and you saw why. I think having that title of NSIC champion back in 2018, again, really set the bar for this team that there's absolutely no question they were going to be competitive this year. It's all going to be depending on how far they could go, because we didn't get the results last year because the season was cut short. But there's absolutely no question that these guys were going to be competitive this year. the options up and down the lineup for head coach Scott Ewell to run with. Really, any guy on this roster can hit a deep ball. And when you have that luxury, man, oh man, are the Beavers tough to stop. And in fact, it does actually start off with Coach Ewell setting the standard and setting the culture that is the Minot State Beavers baseball team, setting a precedent in winning, and they have the team to do so. And they weren't bad this year. Again, well, they were good. They weren't bad either. They ended up having the number 4 seed going into the NSIC tournament. If you remember back then, 2018 NSIC champions, they're familiar with it. They can easily do it again. But when the time for postseason came, the connection, just unfortunately, it was not there. And Crookston, who their first round opponent was, so this was a best of 3 series that the Minnesota Crookston Golden Eagles ended up sweeping the Minot State Beavers. And although the Beavers had making it a very entertaining second game, just could not get that extra run before the Eagles got that final out. Heartbreaker. In heartbreaking fashion, it wasn't that the Beavers weren't a bad team. It was probably more so the Eagles just kept pushing all the right buttons, and they were getting in the heads of the Beavers. If you recall, before the tournament, these two teams actually faced each other before the NSIC tournament for one last series, and the Beavers embarrassed them at Corbett Field. They embarrassed them. And although the Eagles took one game in that series against the Beavers, now that had to have let a sour taste in their mouth. And it was all of a sudden, you go from beating the Eagles 4-1 and 19-0. There I go saying that embarrassment game for the Eagles. But then the Crookston Eagles going with the final game of the series, winning that one 4-3. Again, that left a sour taste in their mouth and just a flip of a switch, and all of a sudden, the Eagles just found something that they got to the Beavers, and they didn't have an answer for what the Beavers kept throwing at them. And honestly, the Beavers weren't out of it. Like, they were in contention that first game, but the Eagles just found another gear in them. And when you go down early in game 2, very hard to come back from, especially it being the postseason. The Beavers had a comeback effort. They pushed oh so hard to try and come back and push that series to a game 3. The Golden Eagles of Minnesota Crookston, they just found a way. They found something in the Beavers that they were able to exploit, and they got to them, and the Beavers, it's like they didn't know what hit them. And that's tough ending for the Minot State Beavers baseball team on their season. First round exit. However, I don't think that this diminishes that expectations are still high for this team. They can still very easily go on another deep postseason run in the NSIC tournament, and make no mistake, people, they'll be back next year. They're still going to be good. Speaking of good, that is a way we can describe the Minot State Beavers softball team. More so, last year, they were solid. They were scoring runs like no other. This year was kind of trying to stay, I guess you could say, above average. However, they were below 500 for most of the season, but they played well enough that you really couldn't count them out in anything. They had 2 pitching options, just like Minot High did. No matter who you had on the mound, you were going to have a chance to win the game. And that's what they did. They stood afloat. Record-wise, you could say they probably could have been better this year as opposed to last year, but they did enough to earn their way, and unfortunately, they had a similar result to what MSU Beavers baseball team did, losing in round 1 of the NSIC tournament. On that first game, it was 10-2, losing to the University of Sioux Falls, the Cougars. But again, it was an opportunity the next game to stay alive, stave off elimination against the Winona State Warriors. But the Warriors just had enough to edge out the Beavers for the 6-5 win, thus ending the Beavers softball season early. But again, it was that chance that they had of being able to compete. Although it never seemed like they found that second gear in them to really put them over the edge. They still had a solid season out of it, but again, never really just found that second gear or that edge to come out on top, at least for the majority of the season. Just like the Beavers baseball team, they are out of it early and hoping next year proves to be better results. I don't think not much will change. I think the Beavers for softball would definitely like to see a more balance on the record. Beaver baseball definitely wanting to get past that first round hump and get back to the NSIC title game. Hopes of, but both their seasons end in round 1. Congrats also to the Minot State track and field and golf athletes on their individual accomplishments. Many records were broken, some provisional qualifiers for the NCAA races, all NSIC with Leif Nelson having done javelin. Again, like I said, lots of podium finishes. Just another classic finish for the track and field team, and also well done by those competing for the golf teams as well. Before we go on here, I just want to tell you guys about our sponsors. That are Peyton Bartsch Photography and Joshua Strong Photography. Again, widely known characters, Peyton with Minot High, Josh originally from Minot State, and all they care about, well, obviously they would care about other things too, but huge passions for taking some action shots at sporting events where the athletes are just going crazy. Something happens and the athletes just make the moment even better. And when you get a piece of that, that is almost treasure. That is treasure for these guys. Be sure to give Josh and Peyton some follows on social media, at Bartsch Photos on Twitter and at Peyton Bartsch Photography on Instagram. For Josh, it's both the same, at _Joshua W. Strong, both Twitter and Instagram. And also check out KMSU TV and Radio on social media. Again, at KMSU19 on Facebook and Twitter, at KMSU TV Radio on Instagram. And check out the YouTube page at KMSU TV. That's where stuff like our campus TV show called MSU Inside Out, kind of a laid-back news show. We have hosts that interview guests. We have a news anchor. I just got done being the sports reporter. Whole lot of fun doing that. We also have a weather person and also a live shot reporter, which is just another interview of a guest just in a different room. But it's a whole lot of fun. And we'll also have our upcoming sports show this semester, or this upcoming fall semester. And it's going to be all solely on sports at Minot State, but also could be around the Minot area. And also some regional stuff like the Minnesota Twins, Vikings, Wild, and Timberwolves, and other professional sports that are relevant. Obviously, since we are right next to the state of Minnesota, this is who we have to focus on if we get the regional reporter position, but nice little touch to add some pro sports in there. News, stats, scores, and info, all that fun stuff. It is also home to Samuel Stinson's and Robert Kibler's podcast called The Lookout. They get a whole ton of different people on there to get a unique perspective, whether it's staff, students, former staff, or former students, just kind of talking about some of their recent accomplishments, kind of motivation behind why do they like what they do. I was originally on that podcast during the pandemic while we were all in quarantine last year. I had a lot of fun doing that. I enjoyed it. Dr. Stinson and Dr. Kibler do phenomenal work with that. But again, be sure to check out Peyton and Josh and KMSU TV and Radio, all on social media, to catch up all on the latest going on, not just around the Minot sports world, but and also some unique Minot cultural stuff. But once again, we thank them for the sponsorships of the podcast. We thank them for being part of the family. And we'll be right back after this quick break.
Welcome to KMSU TV and Radio. You might be asking, what is KMSU? It is the brand name for the MSU Broadcasting Department, home to the many young and aspiring communication majors here at Minot State University. When joining KMSU, there will be many different opportunities to get involved. Students will get a hands-on learning experience in lots of future career fields, like the production of content, being a leader in public relations, operating social media, or even writing and journalism. KMSU is also home to the local public access channel, where students can produce the weekly campus TV show and talk on live radio. From us here at KMSU, we hope to see you along the way.
And like I said earlier, KMSU, the brand name is more for the radio and TV stations. So for KMSU, our Midco Channel 19, we have access through Mid-Continent, Channel 19, and our live radio station, which got some beautiful new updates to it, a whole new desk that holds now 5 mics instead of 2, and it just looks like a really cool, a really awesome setup that you would actually see in a live an actual radio station. And to have this here at the college, it's just phenomenal work. Props to Lee Johnson for all the dedication and the work he puts into improving the MSU broadcasting department. Now, back from break, I said that we would discuss the Minotauros, and that's what we're going to do right now. The Minot Minotauros, having finished out their season with a first-round exit, but when you have to go up against a team like the Aberdeen Wings, that's going to be another challenge for the Tauros to face, them being the defending Robertson Cup champions and having this historical season. Just blew everyone out of the water. I think had the most wins, most goalie wins, or I can't remember all the stats, but it was like most wins by a team ever or something like that. I'd have to do more research on it. But long story short, keeping it simple, the Aberdeen Wings, they blew out everyone. But not so much in the Robertson Cup championship game, which we'll discuss here in a moment. But you knew it was going to be a challenge for the Tauros, and to have the Wings in our own division, boy, that sounds like a lot of fun, doesn't it? But anyways, the Tauros, you could probably say the easy prediction was probably the Tauros would get swept. They would lose both games in Aberdeen, and you could easily say that they would lose one at home. That's just how good Aberdeen is. But here's the thing, though. What Aberdeen did, all their accomplishments, granted, they do have a Robertson Cup title in their name. All the stuff they did was all in the regular season. Now, they are defending champs, so they deserve that honor. But when it comes to playoff hockey, that's a whole different animal. That is a whole other animal. And what the Tauros did to the Aberdeen Wings has to be at least one of the most impressive things you saw in the Robertson Cup playoffs. I mean, I'm guilty of it too. I thought the Tauros would be bounced early, except the players, them as a whole group, they weren't fazed by it. They weren't fazed by having to play Aberdeen at all. And when you take into account playoff hockey, everything is magnified. Everything, you take your level of play, you take what you've been doing times 10, essentially. Because one misstep in the postseason could cost you big time. The Tauros, the style, the scheme that they were putting up against the Aberdeen Wings, they were throwing the body, they were being very physical. All Aberdeen wanted to do was just skate fast, shoot and score, outskate the Tauros in every facet. But when you devise a game plan like the Tauros did, using physicality to your game and roughing those guys up, keeping them in low-scoring games, putting them in a position that they've never been in before or something they haven't seen in a very long time. I was talking to Ken Oda about this. He was super gracious enough to have me speak on the Tauros intermission reports, although I would say I wasn't my utmost insightful chatter on the radio. I thought I made some improvements. I thought there's definitely a lot to be had with that sample size, but I was talking to Ken Oda that has Aberdeen ever faced any sort of adversity? Like, when was the last time that happened? Like, they won the Robertson Cup the last time we played NAHL hockey. Like, that was their coming out party. When was the last time they really faced adversity? Because it's been a long time. What the Tauros managed to do was they took the game to them, and they put them in a spot where, when you talk about the series that just happened, there were a few overtimes mixed in there. One especially went deep into the second overtime. And when you talk about the play style that Aberdeen likes to use, they want to try to outskate everyone. Of course, they're going to outscore you, but they want to try and outskate everyone. Just speed past everyone. Just speed. All skill, all score. But when that was taken away from them, and you go deep with this team into an overtime game in the playoffs, again, I'm going to ask the question, when was the last time that they've truly ever faced something like that? A situation they're not very familiar with, because they just don't stop scoring. They don't stop scoring. They don't stop skating fast. They don't stop, trying to outskate their opponents. Like, they're not familiar. It's been a long time since they've been in a position like that before. And when you take away their goal-scoring ability, that puts them in trouble. Like, you have them right where you want them to. They're in trouble because they're a more vulnerable hockey team when you put them in a spot like that they're not comfortable with, that they're not familiar with in 2 years or so. I know, granted, the Wings took the series, but the Toros, Ken Oda said it right. They have absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. And also credit Keenan Ranciere, but they took the Aberdeen Wings to a decisive Game 5 to see who would go on to play in the second round of the Robertson Cup playoffs. And not only that, but took them deep into overtime in that deciding Game 5. Well, in the end, the Toros gave them all that they could handle. The Wings came up with one more goal to win the game and the series. But again, the Toros have absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. It seems like their style of play really helps when it comes to playoff hockey, wearing the opponent down. Honestly, like, if you have any sort of physicality, if you can hit guys whatsoever at the next stage of the game, you're out here showing us that you're not messing around. You're here to play. And the Toros, the grit and character that they showed against a team that was favored to beat them, not even in 5 games, favored to sweep them. Again, they weren't fazed by it. They went out and they played their style of hockey against a team that seemed to have trouble with how the Toros matched up with them. Because again, when you get the Wings in a tough spot, game's not over. Like, the game, it's there for you to win. Like, don't just assume that you're going to lose because it's Aberdeen. The Toros put themselves in a chance to win. And that's not easy to do against the Wings. So credit the Toros, giving everything they had, outworking Aberdeen in some cases. But it came down to that one goal that Aberdeen had left to take it, and the Toros, although losing in the first round, unexpectedly forcing it to go the distance against a powerhouse team like Aberdeen. This has to leave some hope for the Toros and the Toros fans, for all of us that ride and die with this team, for all of the moments that the Toros were bend, don't break defensively, and we're stumbling heading into the postseason. They had that 3rd seed locked up, but then lost it in the last couple games of the season. They were stumbling into the postseason. And now when you have something like this happen, there's definitely some hope for and optimism for this Toros team next year. Coach Wags knows what he's doing, and he had them all playing well to an identity, sticking to it. That gave Aberdeen all sorts of trouble for other teams to take note of as well, especially for how tough this Central Division is. While we are on this topic, the NAHL season ended today, and it was actually the Aberdeen Wings making it to the Robertson Cup final. But the team that had beaten the Minotauros in the 2018 Robertson Cup, the Shreveport Mudbugs, they do the same to the Aberdeen Wings. The Mudbugs take the Robertson Cup over the Aberdeen Wings. 4-2 is the final score. Just goes to show you regular season stats, anything like that happens during the regular season, all means nothing besides, the record to determine the seeding and such. And so now that is that for hockey in the North American League. We have some coaching hires to get through. In particular, with, I guess we can count one for Minot High as well, but a lot of ones for Minot State Athletics. For the Minot State Lady Beavers basketball team, Mike Brandt. He is the new bench boss for the Minot State women's basketball team. He has plenty of coaching experience coming from Southern Methodist University, along with USC Aiken. And when you get a guy with experience, that's already a good sign. And maybe this could be, a new change of culture for the team in a good way, that this could be the up and up starting next year for the Lady Beavers. So there's certainly lots of optimism to be had there, especially when you include that he has over 500 collegiate career wins as a head coach. That is something definitely not to scoff at, for sure. So if you want to talk optimism, I think he's definitely a reason for that. It may not happen right away, a chance for this team to improve greatly. It may not happen right away, but we may see it in spurts that we see progress this year and then the next year and then the year after that. And then it gets to that point where we may see this team competing. And nothing against Mark Groppe, an experienced head coach at the helm. And then along with Amber Renz, who has been assigned as the assistant to Mike Brandt, a coach who the players already know very well and are already really connected with. That's a good sign for the girls. They're going to be more motivated. They're going to be feeling better about themselves. The practices might be a little more relaxed. It might be something more right up their alley. They're going to be way more comfortable, I think, with that decision. So we'll see where that takes the Lady Beavers, but Mike Brandt, the new head coach of Minot State women's basketball. Moving over to the cross-country side of things, the Beavers are hiring Sarah Fowler. She hails from, if I can pull it up here, coming to Minot, North Dakota to coach the Beavers in cross-country. She came from Big Ten at Nebraska, where she was actually a volunteer coach. All this coming from the Minot State Athletic Communications Department. So when you get a resume like that, even if it's just a volunteer coach, if you see Nebraska on the resume, that's got to be an exciting move, not just for the athletic department, but also the runners, the cross-country runners, knowing they're getting someone from a high-profile school like Nebraska, spreading all the knowledge that's been passed down upon her. Anytime you can add from a big school like Nebraska is not only impressive, but also the team's probably very eager to get to work right away. So Sarah Fowler, new head coach for the cross-country Beavers, coming over to help build the dam. Then we got some Toros. Back to the Minotauros again with some coaching news as well. Nothing with Shane Wagner, who will be back for another year, but adding to the staff to accompany Coach Wagner. Now this will perk your interest. If you can recall back in the early days of the Toros, having played in the Eck rink, if you remember Darren Banks and Jake Howie, they're on their way back to Minot. And they're going to help coach or be a part of the coaching staff with the Minot Minotauros as assistants to get that sort of cohesion as a whole. You know how well the Toros are at taking care of their alumni, making sure they get all the recognition, whether it's on social media. Pretty much the only thing that I've seen they do on social media, recognizing their alumni. Who knows, they might do more stuff with that. But to get that cohesion, that connection, knowing you've had those players in your system before, and now returning as head coaches, where they know the game pretty well, and they can help teach these players from a player aspect, from one time being a player, having that player aspect on their resume, it sure does help a lot. That's really a key factor. Looking at Jake Howie and Duran Banks, that's going to help a lot. And how often do we see former Toros players become coaches? Like, they all want to go to the big leagues, right? They all want to go as far as they can into furthering their hockey careers, whether it's in the NHL or AHL or playing in college, getting a degree. Usually you don't see guys, or usually you don't see a lot of guys try to go for the coaching aspect of it. And well, that's what those guys have decided, and how lucky we are to have them back here. And this will help, like I said, this will help the team a lot. Bring some fresh voices into the room, some voices that they know they've been players before. They know they've been in the situation that these guys have played through. So their insight is going to help tremendously. And as far as related to the Toros situation, it is a bummer that we have to report that head coach Wade Regier of Minot State men's hockey will not be returning to the team next year. Article citing some reasons that he wants a chance at the upper levels. Of course, with the Beavers staying as a club team, they're now going to be under the direction of the athletic department, so they are moving full-time under Minot State Athletics, whereas they've been on their own, doing their own sort of thing with social media, acquiring players, recruiting players, whatnot. A little piece of that will also be affected by the Minot State Athletic Department, but they had gone through coaching interviews. I guess it was a requirement thing that they do interview the guys in-house now that they're going to be under athletic department affiliation, but it was in his best interest. Obviously, we may not know the full story, but according to the article, it was in his best interest that it said he wants to go looking for jobs at a higher level. But whatever that says, whatever may be going on in the background, we still wish the absolute best for Coach Wade, wish the absolute best for Coach Regier and his family moving forward. So instrumental in bringing the culture and also getting the Beavers to win those national championships, bringing home the Murdoch Cup twice and getting those banners hung up. It'll be a huge loss, but again, we wish him and his family all the best. But with that said, comes a new change in the position. He is very familiar with the team, and the players know him, the fans know him. Everybody should know who Coach Wyatt Waslinchuk is, because that is who will be managing the bench for the Minot State men's hockey team. He gets promoted from assistant to head coach. And honestly, this coaching search couldn't have gone any better for the Beavers. This, you could say, was probably the best possible outcome for this team. Retaining Coach Waslinchuk, having him stay here in Minot, very huge. And he's had his fingerprints on the championship teams before, and he's going to make it all on his own. He gets to have all the say, and obviously he'll have maybe an assistant on hand. We'll see how it goes when it comes to that point. But Waslinchuk, this was a huge move for the Beavers to keep a familiar face in-house. So the coaching search is done for the Beavers. And again, is a cause and effect sort of thing, with him going to head coach for the Beavers, leaving the Toros, having to bring in some new guys. Not necessarily a bad thing, but good on the other hand. One more coaching hire before we conclude the show there. I know a lot of you cheerleaders out there supporting the Minot Sports Podcast. Thank you so much. So gracious. But it is news as of June 10th that Vitaly Klimpel has been named the new cheerleading coach for Minot High in the sports of football and basketball. Another perfect example of working her way up the ranks, going from coaching at JV, and now the reality, it's reached the point. She is now the varsity head coach. Not quite for hockey, but still a very hardworking, phenomenal achievement for Klimpel herself. So congrats, Vitaly, once again. Wishing, of course, all the best in the new adventure. And also, don't take her lightly either, because she's taken, if I'm not mistaken, one of her JV groups to a state title before. And I think she's very capable of doing it again this time for the varsity team. Once again, wishing all the best to Vitaly. We know she's going to be doing a lot of great work with this group. And let me just say, Minot sports fans, that we have been going a while at this. Lots of great news content and coverage on this episode 25. A good, strong finish to Season 2. And this has been it. We shall now move on to the summer season of sports going on around Minot. We will chat more on Saber Dogs, Vistas, Metros, Expos, Storm Fast Pitch in the next one. I know I mentioned it earlier, but we'll get that kind of fitted accordingly with summer, the first summer series show. Get that fitted accordingly there. But don't worry, we'll talk about them. And this summer should be a lot of fun. I'd like to bring in a lot of people into the studio, or at least have them interview by phone, get lots of great insight from other voices, and hear about some of the success stories happening recently. But again, Minot sports fans, thank you as always for tuning in and listening. This has been episode 25 of Season 2. This has been Season 2 of the Minot Sports Podcast, unless I decide to mix it up, change it a little bit, but this should be it for Season 2. If not, you guys will notice. But thank you, as always, to our sponsors, Peyton, Bartsch, and Joshua Strong Photography. Go check them out on social media. Also, thank you to KMSU TV and Radio, Minot State Broadcasting Department, always gracious enough to let us use the studios. Obviously, I am a student. Being able to use the stuff, it's a privilege. I am lucky for sure, and still lots of more extensive and exclusive content on the way. Be sure to check out the podcast on social media at Minot Sports Podcast on Instagram, Twitter's at Minot Podcast, YouTube at the Minot Sports Podcast, and Facebook is the same handle. Thank you guys once again. I will see you all for the start of the summer series. As always, have a nice day. Stay safe out there and take care as always.